All right, everybody. Thank you so much for tuning in to what'll be it'll be the last live stream for a couple weeks, not our last live stream, but it's going to be the last one for a little while. And so I appreciate everybody that's logged on already. I know I've sometimes get these going just a few minutes early, but I figured I would get started. And the one thing I want to talk about a little bit today, depending on the time that we have and what your interests are, because this isn't Ask Me Anything. So feel free to ask me whatever you want. I did want to talk about doing some activist training in various places around Washington State. So one of the things that I've wanted to do for a while, and I'm going to start trying to do it probably late July, is travel around and go to different places and try to train teams of people on how to set up, for lack of a better term, like kind of the watchdog or government, a team of people that are willing to actually pay attention to local government. And there's some basic skills that are worth developing if you want to be effective in that process. And it isn't rocket science. I'm not the first one to ever talk about all these, but I think I'm the first one to kind of integrate them into kind of an organized system. And I think that if we can train more people to do this, both your time will be better spent, you're going to be more effective at trying to hold people accountable in local government. And I think that once you develop those skills locally, it's relatively easy then to use those and shift those into holding government more accountable at the state level or at federal agencies. I mean, the skills translate fairly well, but it's easier sometimes just to stay focused initially on local government and develop those skills there. And then they kind of, it's easy to scale them up then to the bigger operations. So it is one of the activities that I'd like to be more involved in doing. And when I say this, I'm really talking about going out and doing in-person training. So my intention is to travel out to set up an appointment, figure out a time, and try to give ourselves enough time that it can be effective. Weekday evenings work out for me fairly well, but we could, even if we had to do 2 nights in a row or 1 week, one night, 1 week, and then another night the next week or something to do follow-up types of training, but very much a hands-on, very practical, skill-based examples, using the structure that you're focused on paying attention to, whether that's a school district, city council, county commission, any kind of combination, fire district, I guess, but or all of those where you live, and how to set up a basic team of people to be more effective watchdog folk, how to work together as a team so that you don't get caught up in infighting, and how to be focused on trying to hold local government accountable. I do think these skills are useful. People will sometimes, I think, watch my videos, or you'll read my articles, or maybe even see me speak in an event, and you'll think, oh, that's something I could never do, but this is really not true. A lot of the things that I've done, I've just learned how to do the hard way. And so there's no reason for you to make the same mistakes that I've made or watched other people make. And it doesn't mean you won't make your own, but at least you can get focused on setting up a team that can go and hold government accountable. And there's some basic fundamental ways of doing that. So I can see that I'm getting a bunch of questions already coming in, so I'll start jumping to the questions. But I definitely want to be, I want to be able to go out and do these types of training sessions for people. I feel like that's a way to take at least a lot of the things that I've learned and hand them over to other people so they can also be doing the same things. One of the things that I want to point out on this is that if you're a serious activist, and I consider myself one, and you care about liberty and freedom, there's no value, in my opinion, in like hoarding information or skills like it's some kind of super secret hidden sauce. And the reason for this is that that people will do that when they think they have some product they want to sell, right? They want to be the only store selling hardware in town, or they want to be the only grocery store in town, because that ability to monopolize the market gives you a special advantage, and so you're able to make more money, for example. Being an activist is a totally different animal. There's not a lot of money in this, number one. And so why somebody would want to be the only person doing something is ridiculous. But also, it's more of a calling or a crusade. You're trying to, at least I believe that I'm trying to promote liberty and freedom. And one of the ways of doing that is holding the government accountable. the more accountable government is held, and the more they believe people are watching them, the more honest and transparent and the less dishonest, I think, anyway, that they're going to probably be. So the only way to do that is to have a lot of people doing it. No one person's going to do it themselves. And I don't tend to believe in empire building when it comes to activism in particular. So I'd really like to spread the skill set far and wide and help train people. Again, they'll adapt it to their own community, but to give them at least the basic skills that they can go and do a lot of the things I've done or even more. So I think that I think it's important to do. I'd like to do more of it. I've done elements of this in the past at times, but I think I need to do it on a more consistent and regular basis. And I think that people will benefit from this. So a lot of people not even watching this video right now would benefit from it, because what I find is there's always something that happens in your local community that inspires a whole new crop of people to get involved, because they suddenly realize that they hadn't paid attention to politics before. But now suddenly politics is paying attention to them. Politics is destroying their kids' education, and in fact, the future of all the kids in the community. Or politics has turned the central plan department into a nightmare zone at the county, or there's corruption kickback schemes going on at the city level, or the grant grifting operations with the homeless industrial complex, whatever it is. These things don't actually, there's not a lot of unique things that happen in local government. It actually tends to be the same thing over and over again, different names, different faces, but the scheme and the plan and the corruption is basically the same everywhere. And so the more people that know how to do this, the more we can get out there and I think change it. And part of that is also learning how to communicate the information that you uncover or expose, and understanding a practical use of that information and how to make something happen, how to change the perception anyway of what's going on in your community so that you're less likely to get those same types of people involved. So anyway, that's my plan. That's something I'd like to do. I'm going to start doing that. I'm going out to Yakima on July 20th. So I'll be out there doing a presentation there. And I might start experimenting with that presentation, but I'd like to just schedule a series of them all over the state or even in other states. I've been invited to go to some other states and train some of their activists as well. And so I just think this is a basic skill set that anybody can have. And again, I just think that by training more people, then there's more people out there pushing for liberty and freedom. The whole point of me doing this is because I care about liberty and freedom. I care about the future of my kids. So I want more people to also care about it, because there's great strength in numbers and you don't want to be the only guy out doing it. Trust me. So just quick comments. Let's see. Jeremy, you're asking a question that everybody asks all the time. Is there even a glimmer of hope for our state? And of course there is. And easily. I mean, Washington State has a lot of opportunity. Now, there's a lot of challenges, a lot of problems here, but I think you're going to find those problems and challenges generally exist everywhere. And I think we have to be very careful about artificially inflating the negativity, which is as bad as it is, right? We definitely have creeps and we have weirdos and we have corrupt people in government. But the truth is those people have always been in government over the years. Some that are a little more open about it now, perhaps, but that comes and goes in waves over time. If you were to read what an activist was writing in Washington State back in the 1920s and 30s, you would think, other than maybe some of the language they use, you would actually think it's today. That's the same thing that you would feel if you were reading about it in the 1840s with activists on the East Coast, what they were writing about. So I think that each generation has to face very similar challenges and problems when in the time that they live. There are significant problems and threats to society that exist out there, right? I mean, but as an activist in something, Washington State is a state that is completely salvageable and worth saving too. So it's just a matter of, I think, getting more people engaged and involved and doing a much more effective job. But don't outsource your freedom and liberty to somebody else. Engage yourself on it, and you're going to find that there's more things you can do. So otherwise I wouldn't be here, right? If I didn't believe that, I wouldn't be involved. Jason, you have a question here. What are your thoughts on the state gun case? It's almost like someone I know was able to look into his magic orb and foresee into I'm assuming you're saying into the future there. Okay. I'm assuming you're talking about the lawsuits that are at the state level. And I am never able to predict what judges are going to decide on state lawsuits, no matter how good they are, and particularly anything that has to do with firearms. And we're pretty early. The motion practice, I really need to see some activity more in the court system before I'd be able to get a pretty good sense of where the judge is going to take that one. So I don't have any good insight into it right now. Question for Tim, from Tim here. My Republican reps just say they don't have votes to be productive, and I say not being more persuasive. Well, good point. And this is one of the things that, Tim, you bring up a good point. And elected officials always say this, and then they're not wrong, right? In the Washington state, Republicans in the state House and state Senate, they don't have the votes to generally get through what they want. But I will point out that it was only a couple years ago that Republicans actually had control in the state Senate, and they were only 2 votes down in the House. So that's not an excuse. At that time, they were able to actually make some impact, more on the negative side, like what they were able to prevent coming out of the legislature, than it was as far as a positive agenda. But one of the things that does happen with elected officials at the state level and the state legislature is they get into a defeatist mindset, and it's very difficult for them to break out of it. And it's also very comfortable. There's a lot of elected officials on the Republican side who enjoy being losers, and they enjoy being on the losing side because they can always just point the finger and they never really have to do anything. It's lazy, but it's also human nature, and it's not an uncommon situation to be in. It's frustrating. It also is a part of the problem that you see is that when you're in the minority, as the Republicans are in both houses right now, you need to focus on giving reasons for people to vote for your side if you were in the majority. And that requires putting forward a positive agenda of saying, hey, here's the things that we plan on doing, right? Here's our solution for crime, here's our solution for education, and put forth your positive agenda. And you can say, hey, I don't, unlike the other side, we don't plan on molesting your kids or trying to put them in situations where they're going to be molested. We actually want them to learn math. We don't believe in homeless junkie camps spread all over the place. And we don't believe in paying nonprofit grifting operations millions of dollars so that they can encourage more drug addicts to die on the streets. You can put together a pretty good program, but you also have to have people capable of communicating it. And right now, the legislature's lost over the last few years. Actually, it's just in the inevitable churn in a part-time legislature like we have in Washington State. They have lost quite a few good communicators that they had. It doesn't really matter what your thoughts were about those legislators, that we had really good communicators that are no longer there. And some of the most comfortable legislators in Olympia are actually terrible at communicating, or just non-functional when it comes to communication. It's always hard to imagine, because when you run for office, you think that it requires you to communicate to people, and you go out and you campaign. But especially if you're in Eastern Washington and you're a Republican, you're more likely to get elected over there. But that doesn't make you a good communicator. It just means you networked well and you've been in office for a while. And sometimes you get fossilized in office. So you've been there a long time. And we sometimes need a little bit of turnover, I should say, in the Republican side of the legislature, just so that we have people who are more dynamic and more capable of communicating well. And you can't rely, if you're looking for somebody else to teach you how to communicate, that's part of the problem. So if you're at that level of government, so you need more people who can get in there and already know what they believe, why they believe, and what they're planning to do. If they are in the majority. And that's a real weakness that we have in the state legislature right now on the Republican side. And it's particularly an unnecessary weakness, considering the weirdos and the real incompetent, crazy lunatics that the Democrats have put into office right now. We have some exceptionally stupid people over there on that side that are really underwhelming. Not every one of them, but most of them are exceptionally underwhelming. This particular batch that's in Olympia, it's one of the laziest batches of Democrats I think that we've had in a long time. And so with exceptional levels of ignorance of pretty much everything other than voting how they're told to vote. And so the Republicans could really have a nice contrast if they had the right candidates, I think, coming out and doing a better job. So it would be really good if we got more of that going. Kay, you had a question here about where do I sign up for this training? And That is really more about people. Good question, but I think it's more about not so much me putting on the training classes as you organizing a group that's interested in making a difference in your community, and I'll come out and train you how to make an impact. And it doesn't take a huge number of people, although the more people you can expose to the training, the better off you are. So, for example, if I can train about 20 people, I figure that maybe 5 of them become really, really highly capable activists, and another 10 or so could become supporters of theirs over time. Once you start achieving things or making things happen, people will come to you. They're going to join your group and they're going to want to work with your team. So I think that that's very, very important. Um, okay. So there's another question here that's Tim again, different. No, this is Tim. And your question is, why are we seeing the same criminal in front of a judge for the 74th time and then being released? Well, that's a great question, but you're definitely seeing a complete and total collapse in the legal system of any sort of accountability for especially for nonviolent crimes, but even for violent crimes now. And the reason why you're seeing that is that the judges are being pushed both by the criminal defense lobby, but this George Soros kind of associated movement where they want to decriminalize everything. And I'm fairly libertarian when it comes to reducing the amount of crimes that government artificially defines as crimes. I'm there with you, man. When Trent England and I worked at the Freedom Foundation, that was always one of our conversations: is government trying to invent new ways to turn people into criminals. The problem is real crimes that actually create victims, right? So assault, theft, robbery, violence, these types of crimes, those are real. And the tendency of recent law enforcement, not so much at the police level of the law enforcement, but certainly the prosecutor's office or the attorney general's office, right? They've decided that they just aren't going to prosecute those crimes. And that has kind of infected even the Department of Corrections. They're not keeping people in prison that should be in prison. And so early release these criminals is doing what everybody would predict and expect will happen. They just commit more crimes, create more victims. They actually it creates this horrible structure and recycling of the criminals where they're just never put behind bars. This is not new. People who think this is new just are completely ignorant of history. We've already done this once. In the 1950s and 60s, we had this exact same stupid, dumb idea of reforming criminals, and that they all just were misunderstood people, and that no matter how much violence they committed, that they just were misunderstood, and let's keep putting them back on the street. That was why New York City was such a crime hole when I was there as a student in the early 90s before Giuliani took over. That was what happened in New York, or I should say Detroit. That's what's happened in Chicago today. But all these cities went through this, and then they started cracking down on crime. And they did. They started cracking down on crime mid-90s or so. Once Giuliani kind of showed you could do it in New York City, a lot of those community-based policing efforts and broken windows theory, James Q. Wilson theory stuff, that was being implemented, and it worked. It did. It worked. And they don't like the fact that it worked because it actually made the cities much more livable, made society better. Fewer people were being victimized. I think there was a good improvement. Instead, the reversal now has been, let's launch more criminals into the community and let's create terrible crimes everywhere. The other challenge I think that we have now, and it's one that's worth noting, is that same criminals get in front of the judges for the 74th time being released, like you asked there. They're trying to hide crime stats, or they're trying to falsify crime stats, and they're putting pressure on cities in various places, especially cities, not so much counties yet, but cities in particular are definitely putting pressure to reduce the crime statistics so that they can falsify what their official crime stats are, so they don't look as bad. And yet anybody who lives there knows there's something wrong, right? Your car's being stolen, your homes are being broken into, people don't feel safe at night. That is a serious issue that is coming up, and that's why you're seeing it. It's a philosophical thing that the Democrats at this point in time have totally bought into. Back in the 50s and 60s, it was both Republicans and Democrats that bought into it for a while. This time, it's 100% only Democrats, and they're the ones that own it. Jason, you have a question here about what are your thoughts on the Seattle Times poll that drug use and crime is a concern of Seattle residents? Yeah, that's a great question, Jason. That was the same. I was listening to that and reading some of the results on that. That was interesting because despite the theory The Seattle Times and the Stranger are the two newspapers, and really I don't know what the difference is other than the profanity of the Stranger. A lot of the Stranger journalists have taken over the Seattle Times. There's hardly any difference. The Stranger used to be just a crazy leftist outfit, and instead of just being that contrast, the Seattle Times has become the same thing without the profanity. So but the Seattle Times still does real polls. The Stranger, I don't think, does anything like that. And so the Seattle Times is polling people and find out, yeah, drug use and gun crime being a concern of Seattle residents. Violence in general is a concern. And the only way you can possibly not think that is you have to know nobody that lives in Seattle. Anybody that lives in Seattle will tell you the same thing. There's a question here from Hammer Time. Would you please go over what grant grifting is again and how it works? Yeah, I'm happy to do that. Grant grifting has been around for a long time, but in its current form, where it's just become this industrial level operation, it's usually nonprofits. They don't have to be nonprofits, but it's usually nonprofits that pitch their services to whatever local elected body it is. City and county is the most typical, but sometimes to the state directly. And because there's federal grants that come down and they say, we want to address homelessness, drug addiction, whatever the Great Society sort of theory is that they want to solve. And here's a pile of money, and then we're going to let local government do it. And the reason why they let local government do it is because local government, government only gets more incompetent, right? The higher level of government you go. And so, but government's incompetent at every level. It's just usually it's disastrously terrible at the federal level, disastrously incompetent, of course, the state level. And then sometimes you can get something done right at the local level. So the theory is pushed that cash down to the local level where they can distribute it and they're closer to the actual recipients. And there's truth to that theory. However, what's happened now, especially with the homeless industrial complex in particular, is just filled with this. All these and if you don't believe me, just look at any of the consent agenda at the city councils, any local city council now. Look at the presentations done when they're talking about large grants, especially when they're pass-through grants. The city doesn't feel like it's their money, or they only have to match part of the money. And they've decided, okay, we're going to provide services to drug addicts in our community. Almost all the organizations claiming to provide those services now have no goal at all to actually help anybody get off drugs. That's not their goal. They don't want to make measurements of success based on how many people get off drugs. Their entire goal is to get that grant, because the grant is how they pay themselves a lot of money. That's how a lot of money vanishes into the nonprofit. And so they grift the grant, meaning that they want the money. They sell themselves to the jurisdiction, or they bribe them, or they in some way influence the decision making. And then once they're into the gravy train, their primary goal is justifying the gravy train the next go around. This is not new. It's just being done at a much bigger scale right now when it comes to the homeless industrial sort of world. And it's kind of one of the nastiest of all of these operations, because real people's lives are at stake. And these groups will oftentimes recruit drug addicts from out of town so they can justify higher numbers. They'll inflate the numbers of people that they're trying to help so that they can justify a bigger budget the next year. And the grant grifting thing, they completely refuse to be audited. No one audits them. Nobody even looks. And a lot of them kind of work together where they interlock with each other. It's all about getting the cash. And remember, accountability is zero. Achieving results is zero. All they have to do is fill out a piece of paper at the end of the day saying that they failed again, so they need the money next time. And they don't, of course, say failed, but that's how it operates. So I call that grant grifting. Now, it's not just there. You'll see it on the environmental side too. Save the salmon, right? That's the easiest argument that they'll make. And they create this thing. They say, oh, it's a lot of buzzwords, fluff talk, zero measurable statistics of any kind. And you even have some government agencies that operate entirely like a grift, just a grant grifting operation. The Puget Sound Partnership is a good example. A lot of conservation districts now, especially on the west side of the state, operate this way. They're entirely useless in every measurable way for achieving any benefit to anybody who lives there, except for a very small cadre of people who profit greatly from the money that gets kicked out, and nobody audits them. Nobody looks. Nobody even wants to look. If you even dare look, they attack you because you're evil and probably racist as well if you dare to actually question where that money goes. So grant grifting is existing out here where nobody can audit you, you're not subject to the Public Records Act, you're not subject to anything, and you just collect millions and millions of dollars and do nothing with it, or make the problem worse, more likely. And that's grant grifting. You will never solve the problem that you've been paid to solve, because if you did solve it, you put yourself out of work. Can't get fat paychecks for the nonprofit if you put yourself out of work. So you got to keep the problem going. That's grant grifting. And that is how it works. And it goes on like you can't believe. I doubt there's anybody out here who's not experienced this. Let's see. Sorry about this. Whoa, I miss a lot. What Seattle mayor is planning what is the Seattle? This is from Mayor Bobear. What Seattle mayor is planning to unveil as for to combat violence and open drug consumption in Seattle? Well, nothing really. The mayor has had some stories, and I think he was marginally better than the complete nut job that he's run against. But I don't see him necessarily coming out with a plan that's going to make any big difference. Part of their real plan is just to take the homeless drug addicts and criminals in Seattle and export them to other communities around them, Kent, Renton, Shoreline, wherever they can get them to move to, because it got so bad in Seattle, so openly bad, that they were trying to shift them and move them to some other places. And the Dow Constantine with the King County Council, of course, is eager to help them in that process. So is Bob Ferguson, right? A lot of these people are, because their voter and core is in Seattle. And so it was starting to hurt them because everything was kind of falling apart and very corrupt. So they were, or at least overtly corrupt. And the last thing they want is remember, the narrative matters more than the truth. So when you go down like I did and you were just videotaping the complete nightmare that Seattle had become, well, that was bad publicity. It didn't help their narrative. So they were trying to change it. Chris, you have a question about what's the first thing to tackle to get things changed. The voting system. Yes. I would say the voting system is a good thing to tackle, but you're not going to tackle it right now under the people who are in there now. So you have to spend a lot of time working on that. That's actually a little bit longer. You do have to get people elected who are willing to actually make those changes. And the voting system is an impediment to that, probably. But you just simply have to overcome the corruption or the problem factor and get over that. Some of it's not necessarily corruption. It's just the rules are changed in a way to make it so that what you would think of as honest operations for an election, you can do things that most of us would consider dishonest and illegal. They're legal. So if you learn the game and play it better than the other side, or at least adequately enough, you can kind of overcome it. It's more than that, but that's something you can think about a little bit. Oh, William, good to see you. I see Dragon Slayer there. Thanks for watching. Say hi to your dad for me. Let's see. Mike, you had a question of what is to be said about our Department of Corrections sex change operations on the taxpayer's dime. It's idiotic, of course. It's completely insane, and they shouldn't be doing that at all. And I can't believe. I mean, I guess if you just want to discredit yourself, you do it, but that's what they're doing right now. Jason, got a question here. Clark County is closing another prison. Is this because they let everyone out? They should be putting people in jail, not closing prisons. Yeah, Clark County's not alone. There's actually a couple Department of Corrections facilities that are closing right now. And it is mostly about releasing violent criminals and throwing them out into the city, because after all, what could go wrong? Again, there are some exceptions to this, right? So you have some things that basically you need to work on in regards to, yeah, I think violent criminals need to be in jail, and they need to be in jail for as long as they need to be, as long as you can put them there. And repeat offenders are prolific. Most studies of crime have shown that it's a very small percentage, even of the criminals, that commit most of the crimes. When those guys stay in prison, far less crimes are created out there. And somebody needs to be an advocate for victims. And not a living soul right now that I can see in government on the Democrat side cares about victims at all. Unless you happen to be that one random person that was attacked by somebody in a MAGA hat, then they'll all come out of the woodwork and suddenly rediscover that crime's bad. Otherwise, they just don't have any problem about it. Yeah, do I sell Strickland propane? No, I don't. Let's see. Jeremy, question, does going to a private fundraiser actually help anything? Does my donation do anything? Well, sure. If you're donating to a candidate, I'm assuming you're talking about a political candidate, it always helps. It helps their numbers. It helps them run their campaign. Is your donation the one thing that puts them over the top? Probably not. If you're writing bigger checks, you might be changing how many signs they can put out in the community, maybe the quality of video production that they're doing. But essentially what you're doing with the campaigns is you're raising money so you can run a campaign. That's what you're doing. And so the donation does something over time. If you're talking about fundraisers for other things, I think it's just like anything else. Study the charity or the entity that you're giving money to and decide if they're worthy of your money. That's what you should do anyway, though, whether you give money to a college, whether you give money to me, right? People donate to me on my website. If you don't like what I'm doing, don't give me money, right? Or if you think I'm an incompetent buffoon, don't give me money. If you think I'm actually doing something or achieving something and you want to support me, you can do that. So it's like anything else. Politicians are the same thing. If you think they're doing a good job, it does help if you write them checks and keep them going. Pamela, you had a question about, do you teach voter analysis at the county municipal levels? I do, but I don't quite know exactly what you're talking about on this. I can teach you how to do that yourself. And I think that's probably more important. So if you're interested in doing just like an analysis of how your community votes, I can show you how you can do that yourself. I mean, I'd rather have you do that and learn how to do that than me just doing it for you. There's some question about here. Grants are amazing and free money's rarely ennobling and no such thing as free. Love those comments. You're absolutely right. Here's a question from Rock saying, if you take a grant, you're under control of the ones giving the grant. Sort of. I'm going to tell you that that's not always the case. It's pretty amazing. And this is where the corruption game comes into play. Most people would view it as corrupt if I'm asking for money and I'm a nonprofit. And so I get my $700,000, $800,000 grant from that city every year. Goes up 10% a year or more. And by the way, it just so happens that everybody in my little nonprofit world and my family and stuff, we go to your campaign fundraiser and we all donate the maximum amount of money to you. So conveniently, when our grant comes up next cycle, you're going to be inclined to think that we're just wonderful and you don't even want to look or audit whatever the heck we're doing. And no matter how much evidence that we're failing in every measurable way there might be out there, we're going to convince you through the happy talk that we present to you that therefore we need more money in next grants. And that is how it works. That's how the grant program works. Well, most of us consider that corruption, right? You're giving cash to somebody's campaign, and then you're taking grant money from them. Bob Ferguson's entire AG history as Washington State Attorney General has been, in addition to the 600 attorneys, because God knows there's not enough of them apparently, they hire a lot of outside counsel. And so if you ever look at his PDC returns and who donates to his campaign, a lot of those lawyers and attorneys actually are hired as outside counsel for the AG's office on various projects. So they get sweetheart deals where the state is paying them to do marginal legal work. And then they conveniently, all the partners in that firm, or the majority of them, kick cash back to Ferguson's reelection campaign. That is not illegal. It probably should be, but it's not. And that is how the grant game works too. So some of them may not kick cash back. Some of them, especially at the city level, they might just operate as the foot soldiers to run around and hand out flyers, say, or do other types of work for a campaign. It's very common. It's what happens. And it's a disaster. So in that case, I would say they control the people giving the grant money more than the grantor controls them. Jeremy mentioned your wife on the board of the Thurston County Conservation District. It is a mess. Yes, it is. The Thurston County Conservation District is just corrupt to the core. There's almost no salvageable activity that they do. Every employee, last time I checked, was totally corrupted. The board itself was corrupted, kickback schemes on the board of directors there. They've had a history of this in the past. They had a couple board members a few years ago that came in and tried to fix and clean it up. But no, the goal right now is just to rip off the taxpayers and make sure the insiders make money. The former director there at the Thurston Conservation District was actually kicking back money to her husband's company doing salmon habitat conservation as they destroyed as much farmland as they could in the county, giving that $20 million worth of money that went to her husband's business. And no one at the state level would even audit this. It's just bizarre. Anyway, let's see. why is Bellevue so pristine? That's a question mark that somebody had here. And so, fold, why is Bellevue so pristine? Well, Bellevue is run differently than Seattle. If you don't believe me, just go look at their ordinances, look at how they fund law enforcement, look at how they address planning, everything. Look at the differences. There are differences, and it will change how a city looks. So, yes, Jason, I know, by the way, that I mispronounced Dow Constantine's name, Smack Daddy Dow Constantine from Todd Herman, one of my friends out there. He's a great guy, and that was a funny name, and I'm sure Dow Constantine liked it. Listen, there's a reason why Dow Constantine's not running for governor. He was going to do that a few years ago. He's not running now because we know who he is. And I think more importantly, I think a lot of the people on the left threatened him with exposure of some of his more corrupt activities. So I think it kind of took him out of the game. There's a question here for Kay. Can petitions get the voting on a ballot? So I'm assuming that what you are asking there is if we sign enough petitions, can that put that issue, that initiative on the ballot? And the answer is yes. But you do have to get a lot of signatures on the initiatives that are being run right now. They're all initiatives to the legislature. You need to get about approximately 400,000 signatures by the end of the year. For the one referendum that's being run out there, which is R101, you need to roughly get about 200,000 signatures. There's a lot of people collecting signatures right now. It seems like, I know they're getting tens of thousands of signatures coming in on both the referendum and the initiatives. So I'm feeling good about it, but again, it takes a lot of work. You can't assuming that it's somebody else is doing it. Mayor Bobar, you got a question? Why is seafood so expensive in Washington State? That's funny. It shouldn't be, right? Because you go catch salmon and you can go out and catch your own food. Well, have you ever looked at what a fishing license and hunting license actually is? Anyway, it shouldn't be that expensive here. I always found ways of getting seafood a little bit cheaper, but maybe it's just growing up here and knowing specifically fishermen and fishing boats and people who owned them and working out deals sometimes. So that's the secret, usually, is having some kind of connection where the ships coming back from Alaska, working out a deal there. I don't know. It's just kind of funny. Let's see. TZ, you had a question here. Have you heard about the Supreme Court's ruling on Louisiana's congressional maps? And do you think this will impact Washington State drawing our congressional districts? That's a good question. Essentially, Louisiana's the Supreme Court ruled on Louisiana's congressional maps mostly because of the belief that the Supreme Court had, or at least that they believed after it was presented to them, that the way the maps were drafted is that it punished minority voters, and usually that means they've concentrated minority, usually like Black voters, kind of into a concentrated district, or maybe Hispanic voters or something, so that they don't influence with their electoral votes enough districts. So they're kind of concentrated in one district. Usually that was the argument that the Supreme Court probably ruled on in that case. They're less likely to take that approach with Washington. And I'll tell you, because there's some basic and obvious reasons why. Number one, Washington just doesn't have the same ethnic makeup that other states do. We don't have, we're not as diverse, for lack of a better term. Where we are diverse is we actually have a large Asian population in Washington State, but that comes from a lot of different communities. And that's been true for generations. You also, maybe you have a decent sized Hispanic population, but again, from a lot of different countries, not like some unified approach. And the redistricting approach that Washington uses is, when it was first done years ago, gosh, I want to say 20, 30 years ago, when they finally did the bipartisan redistricting commission that they set up in our state, it tended to produce a result that was less extreme than what you see in some of these other states. So winner doesn't take all when it comes to redistricting in Washington State. In theory, you have competent Republicans and competent Democrats who are basically negotiating where the districts are, and that tends to produce slightly more fair districts. It does rely on competency. The Democrats are always going to be competent with who they put in those positions. The Republicans sometimes are. And so if the Republicans have competent people there, that system tends to produce the best results. Remember, if the redistricting hurts Republicans, nobody's going to contest it. They're only going to contest it if it actually hurts Democrats. So it does. The redistricting commission actually matters. That does matter to making sure that you're on it. But the Republicans have not fared poorly in most of the redistricting processes that have happened. So anyway, that's happened. That's the issue out here. Rock, you have a question. Too many people in prison for victimless crimes too. I mean, listen, I'm sympathetic to the argument, particularly at the federal level, that you'll have people go to prison for victimless crimes in some cases. But and the problem is that there's so many laws now that would turn you into a criminal, right? Having the wrong color of orchid, having a piece of ivory at your home. There's lots of stupid, completely ridiculous rules like that create victimless crimes. They're absurd, regardless of whatever their intentions are. The way they're implemented was ridiculous, and those types of laws I would happily love to go in and fix and address and make it so that they aren't as brutal and harsh and nasty as I think they really are. What we're really talking about, though, is it's not that. In fact, those people are probably the ones that stay in prison. Though what they're doing is they're actively taking some of the most violent and evil people that have ever been caught by law enforcement, people with dead bodies in their background, and putting them back out on the street, or taking violent sex predators with a history of hundreds of victims, taking them, putting them right back out on the street, or taking people, as was referenced in one of the previous questions here, who have repeatedly gone out and committed significant crimes. Stealing a car is a crime, and it should be a crime. You should be punished for that. Breaking into stores, breaking into homes, holding people up at gunpoint, assaulting them on the street, things like this, that should be treated as serious crimes, not as wrist slaps, go and do it again. That's the problem. That's really what we're talking about, not the victimless crimes argument, which I'm sympathetic, but I think we have to distinguish this. And I think a lot of people on our side who were recognizing these ridiculous proliferation of laws that were going to produce a lot of potential criminals for doing nothing really other than existing. We bought into this argument that, hey, we need to reduce these crimes. Well, the Soros and that whole crew has kind of taken over that argument. And instead of having it from a civil libertarian standpoint, they've just decided, let's take the most violent, vicious criminals we can get and let's release them, and let's not put them in jail. Let's just keep sending them out there to victimize people. It's not a good situation. So that's one of the problems. Let's see. Going down here, there's a question from Paul. Is donating through WinRed a good idea, or should it be avoided? I would not touch WinRed based on our doorbelling. It's turned out to operate in some ways similar to the Act Blue investigation that we're looking at. We've gone out now and talked to people who have donated through both of these and then had weird situations happen. And WinRed apparently is also starting to abuse the people who have donated through it, probably because somebody's decided to match the Democrats' money laundering operation on the Act Blue side of things, and then try and do it through WinRed. But sometimes also because then they just keep pulling money, even though you don't want to keep sending that money in. I would say you basically donate to the people you like, donate to the people that you want to support, donate to them directly, and it's much better. Okay, let's see. Pamela, you had a question. Yes, thank you for your answer. I should have stated the question with the words voter polling and other voter trends and predicting using the tools that you use. You have a reputation. Well, I don't know what reputation I have when it comes to that, but I'd be happy to teach people what I know and point them in the right direction for the people and the entities. I think they'd probably do a fairly decent job at that. Danny, you got a question here. Do you think DSHS is a corrupt agency? Thanks for all you do, Glenn. Yes, of course, DSHS is completely corrupt. Remember, when it comes to a bureaucratic government agency, corruption just goes with the territory. And wherever two or more bureaucrats are gathered, you're probably going to have corruption as part of that result. The question is usually how much corruption, right? So is there so much corruption that they're dysfunctional or completely useless in every measurable way as an agency? Puget Sound Partnership, for example, would fit that category. I would say probably 3/4 of the Department of Ecology would fit that category. An increasingly high percentage of OSPI, right, would fit that category. DSHS, probably, they have some good people working there in very specific task-oriented projects that are necessary, but it's a huge agency. And so there's massive amounts of corruption. The Peter principle is on full display there. They kick up, the most incompetent employee typically moves to the top, and that's what they always do. So it's just one of those agencies. It needs a massive house cleaning. It would be one of the hardest ones to fix too. It's one of the hardest ones to address. Jim, let's see. I can send in a form and deduct sales tax for my boat gas. Does that include the new carbon tax also? Good question, Jim. I'm not totally sure if that's true for the carbon tax, because remember, they've inflated this so that they don't allow the end user to basically report how much of the increase in cost of the fuel is actually due to the carbon tax scam. So because you don't know what that is, you're only estimating what your increasing cost per gallon is, and that probably won't fly. So my guess is you couldn't do it, but definitely that's something you can ask your accountant for. Jason asking another question, why is the gas in Washington so expensive? Is it because of all these crazy climate control policies? Yes and no. There's two that I would say cause the increase in gas. Number one, by the way, just backing up, Washington should be one of the lowest cost states in America when it comes to actually getting gas. The primary pipeline coming down from Alaska, right? We have 2 refineries here, big refineries out on the coast. Cherry Point, right? The one in Skagit County too. I mean, these are big refineries. The fuel should be based on just transportation logistics. Washington State should have some of the least expensive fuel. Taxes, yes, the raw gas taxes are, I think we're the second highest in the country right now. When you take this recent carbon tax scam, then that puts us for sure in the gas is guaranteed the much higher than it ever should be. You could take, I think, $1 off the current price you're paying on gas, and that's probably about how much you're actually paying in taxes. Kind of like Europe. I mean, we're just inflating the cost of fuel, and the carbon tax is just a con. It's a scam. It just helps individuals profit from the money that they get. Insiders running these carbon tax schemes and plans, and it's none of that really helps you at all, you or I. It's just one big scam. It'd be something that should just be totally eliminated. It never should have happened in the first place. Let's see. There's a question here about if you release violent criminals. This is from N Fold. If you release violent criminals, they can be used to create an effect, get people to move or lower property values. That's true. It happens when there's an interest in ownership and transformation of an area. Yes, that can happen. That's been done before. We've seen that in other cities, and not so much in other states, but in other cities at times that has happened. And frankly, that's what's happened in the past, right? Tacoma in the 70s and 80s, of course, had a terrible reputation. It doesn't have a great reputation today, but it had an even worse reputation back then. Especially there was that early 90s gunfight that happened between a bunch of retired Army Rangers and a bunch of drug dealers in their community in the Hilltop area. And I remember that pretty distinctly because it was a summer that I had to deliver home oxygen. It was one of my jobs one summer, was driving a delivery truck. And that was one of my routes, was in the Hilltop area. And so I just distinctly remember this whole story at the time. That drove down the price of houses in Tacoma so much that I remember when I graduated from college, I was actually considering buying one of those homes because they're beautiful views of Mount Rainier, right? It was obvious that area was going to change. And I figured a friend of mine and I thought we might be able to buy it, put bulletproof plates, up on the walls and stuff. And we thought we might be able to, hunker down and survive the storm for a few years. And eventually the house would be worth enough that'd be worth the risk. Single guys coming up with great ideas. Didn't do it, but it would have been funny to try it, and it probably would have been worth a lot. Let's see. Rock has a question here. Can we restore ownership of the forest properties in Washington from the feds? Good question, Rock. This has been an issue actually that I worked on a number of years ago. And we're not as bad as like Utah or Nevada or some states like that as far as property ownership, but there's a large percentage, of course, of Washington State forest land and rural property in general, BLM land a little bit, where that's owned by the feds. And of course, nobody mismanages property more than the feds. They're the most incompetent group of people, entity that you could have. If your goal is to burn up all your natural resources and destroy it as quickly as possible, then of course you want the feds to run it. And the argument that's been made in the past, and you really have to go back into this, there's a lot that's been done on this, a lot of research in recent times, mainly led by Utah, about transferring federal properties to the state. And I would support that effort in general. I think the one exception to that's going to have to be your national parks, of which we have a couple in Washington, the Olympic National Park and Mount Rainier generally. There's other national monuments and stuff, but I think I would not be worried about those. It's the two national parks you're going to probably have to keep in federal control, but the rest you should be able to transfer to the state. And the state, as bad as it is, manages the land better than the feds. Maybe the only thing worse than the state, it would be like Nature Conservancy or somebody like that. They do a terrible job when they have property as well. But you can just see in forest management practices, if you've ever gone out and looked at the difference, and from the air you can see it sometimes, on here's the federal land, complete wasteland, the way they've run it, and then here's state land, not so good, but then here's some private land that's been managed for 100 years far better, and it looks better, it's healthier. It's a long movement. It's going to require a long campaign, and I think it's worth doing. So anyway, let's see. Jason, do you see any major gun bill passing next legislative session next year, such as gun registration and ammo background checks, or is it too short of a session? Well, I mean, I would generally say that I don't think there's probably going to be too many more gun bills next year, not unless Ferguson thinks he's desperate for some more cash from the billionaires that tend to support that. Nick Hanauer and his crew, and some of the other Bloomberg, right? These guys have tended to give money to politicians who convince them that they're going to disarm the public and make them more vulnerable to crime. Unless he decides he wants to go down that road, I don't see that happening. I think there's a lot of litigation going on right now to sort out a lot of this. Our state constitution is still very good on gun rights, despite the stupid laws that were passed recently. Ultimately, that could overrule and flip a lot of them out of here, just like the federal Second Amendment issues. But we'll have to see. So I am, I don't think that's going to happen, but we'll have to see. There's something here about from Joy here arguing about the between here and there and catch up. Notice something nefarious. Any recommendation for surveillance cameras? Well, I do have a recommendation for surveillance cameras. Hardwire them in. I think that's better than unless you're just doing like a real temporary thing. I wouldn't do a Wi-Fi camera. Hardwired cameras are better if you can put them in. Make sure that you have you spool a long time, like it doesn't rewrite over itself, so your hard drive setting on it's going to be different. And then make sure you have a really good nighttime surveillance. So that usually means infrared, but there's a couple different ways to set that up, and I would try to set that up fairly well. Jason, you got a question here. What's the craziest thing you found when going through campaign finances? I'll tell you the craziest thing I found last week. It's hard for me to go. I would say the Spokane so far ever has been the Spokane County Democrats. They were probably the most insane, completely non-compliant group in 2017, I think, when I filed that big complaint on them. And that became a fairly big lawsuit. That was the largest settlement that the Attorney General had in any of the AG lawsuits that I forced him to file at the time. It was still, they got off easy. It was like an $86,000 judgment. But what had happened is the chair there had purposely concealed everything in how much money they were raising and how much money they were spending for a long period of time. And then he had tried to do that because he was trying to conceal illegal over-limit contributions from some tribes and some unions. And then what he was doing is he was paying himself a salary, which the board there had proven or had approved. Oh, and he was a pastor, by the way, a crazy leftist pastor, but he was a pastor anyway. Casterlang, that was his name. That's right. Anyway, what a corrupt guy. Anyway, he was trying to conceal his own payments, like his own salary payments, so that people looking at the PDC wouldn't realize he's getting paid. And so he was really doing this complete game. And then what happened was he was the paid executive director, and he was the treasurer, and he was filing the documents because the treasurer quit. And he was filing all the documents under the previous treasurer's name. And so, and what was more crazy about that was actually the attorney. When I saw that they were going to file, they were actually going to investigate this for real. I went down to meet with the two attorneys, one lead attorney and then an investigator who worked for the AG's office. And I went down and meet with them, and I did a whole article about this. And I was going to give them additional information that I'd received from whistleblowers, obviously Democrats or people who had access to the Democrat information. So I had bank statements and credit, and canceled checks and stuff. So I knew what was going on, and I knew how false the information was that was being presented to the public by the Spokane County Democrats. So I went down there and I met them in their lobby just to give them information, right? I work with whistleblowers all the time, and sometimes you have to protect the identity of the whistleblower. They would know that if they being the attorney general employees, if they were honest. One of them I think was honest. The other one was just a complete crook. And he didn't even care. All he was doing is he was grilling me to try to identify who the whistleblower was. And I told him there's no way I was going to tell him, and I didn't trust him. And there's no way I was going to give him any information that would let him know who the whistleblower is. I just told him, these are the account numbers. They're going to try to conceal this account from you. Look at the account number. I have an evidence of it here. If you want to, write it down, I'll help you. That's what you look for, because they have subpoena power. I don't. And this guy was just a scumbag, didn't care, didn't want to investigate. And in fact, he quit about a month later. And he quit because he said he didn't go work for the AG's office to sue Democrats, presumably because he went there to sue Republicans, of course. And it was just a fiasco. And that was probably the most out of control Democrat group in the state. There's probably some other stories. I'd have to go back and look at some of them because there's a lot of them. The craziest one I found last week was actually a Lacey city council member named Stedman, who's currently running for the county commission seat in the 5th position in Thurston County. Originally, I just thought I was going to hit him on some small stuff, but as I dug into it, I realized that he had set up like all of these different campaigns, like staggered over the years between city council races and commission seat races and a surplus fund account, and none of the money matched. Like there was thousands of dollars unaccounted for, or multiple thousands that you couldn't tell at all where it came from, who gave it to him, what happened to it. Some of it had vanished, some of it appeared. Nothing matched. That was the craziest one I found just in the last week. I think I filed 7 or 8 complaints last week. I have a bunch more I'm trying to get done this week. But anyway, so I find stuff like that all the time. And I do like to help people do this. It's not just about me, and it's not just about the fact that I'm filing these complaints. It's fun and enjoyable, and as much as that is a hobby for me, I think it's always better to have other people do it. Jason, you have a question here. Can you do an interview with Dan from Sporting Systems? Great question, Jason. And I would love to do that. I'll have to call Dan. Dan Mitchell is the expert, in my opinion, in discussing the lawsuits, because he's a plaintiff in several of them, and most knowledgeable, I think, about the gun laws and how they applied. So I think that's really good. Paul, you have a question here. Are there any lawsuits of merit in response to the state's trans kid abduction bill? There are no lawsuits currently, but keep in mind, you really want to, the reason why they're running a referendum right now, which is referendum 101, is so that they reject it. In addition to that, the initiative, which is 2081, also addresses that and some of the problems that bill 5599 did. And I would put my effort in there. Lawsuits cost a lot of money, have uncertain outcomes, take forever to resolve, years. I mean, many years. I was in a lawsuit for almost 5 years one time, one of my lawsuits. And so these things drag on forever. You're not going to get the goal. You're not going to get what you want. People who think that litigating is a solution are people who probably don't litigate. That's my opinion. Again, I'm not afraid of lawsuits. Sometimes there's a time and a place for it, just like there is everything else. And if you doubt me when I say that, just look me up on the Odyssey court system. I think I'm listed in like 30 lawsuits there right now over the last 5 years or so. I've been in a lot of lawsuits, but lawsuits are not the solution. You use them when you need to, and you can't be afraid of them, but you need to be fairly prepared for it. So Jim has a question. Inslee can raise the carbon tax on gas as much as he wants without knowing how much that is. Sort of. I mean, it's not about Inslee raising the tax, right? It's about how this carbon tax scheme that they have, or carbon credit scheme that they have, how much money that raises, and then how that gets passed on as a tax, and also the low carbon fuel standard, right? So it's how it's increasing the cost of production, which is still sort of unknown. So it's an indirect tax based on what they're making these guys do. So it's not about Inslee raising it. Now, I would watch where Inslee goes to work after he's no longer governor. Doesn't surprise me if he has some kind of a scheme set aside where he's planning to go make big bucks from one of the greedy groups that he's, made rich based on some of the laws that he's pushed in the state. That would be predictable. Let's see. Pamela, you had a question. Let's see. About me. Yeah, I'm here to help people, so I want to train activists, and I will help as many people as I can. Let's see. Yeah, we need to understand voters that elect crooks. Okay, yeah, and I'd like to understand that too, but remember, most people who vote, probably over 80%, have really no idea who they're voting for, either side. And so they're voting for all kinds of other reasons that people who are watching this video channel probably wouldn't relate to. It's impulsive, last minute, what somebody's told me. I mean, there's a lot of reasons why people vote. And so anyway, that's why people vote for crooks. Usually they don't know they're a crook, or usually they justify their crookedness in some way, or maybe they're getting a kickback because they're crooks. So anyway, Jason, what is your favorite grifting operation? Mine is the bike paths to nowhere in Oregon. That's a good example. I actually think one of the biggest grifting operations, I don't know. I mean, the biggest grifting operation in the state is really light rail. That just has an endless ocean of cash where you're overpaying for every single element of it. And the real grift that goes on there isn't the overcharging and the super expensive, overhyped light rail system that you're developing. At least there's something kind of tangible there at the end of that. What the big grifting operation there are the people that get the land that Sound Transit kicks back for transit-oriented development. That's the biggest scam, because you can get this land for nothing or very cheap, or insider trading, essentially, where they get the land. It's legal, but it's dishonest and corrupt. They get the land, they pretend to build something that people care about, and then after a certain number of years, they're able to sell it. So they claim that they're providing this housing for low-income housing or something, but they don't really care about that at all. It's the big sale in 10 years where they suddenly take this zero-cost land, special deals on building the buildings, the transit-oriented development, and then they make a fortune when they sell it at the end of the day, or force somebody to pay them for it. So that's probably the biggest grifting. My favorite grifting operations that have been set up that I think are particularly nasty is, so favorite is a relative term here. I think a lot of the homeless industrial complex sort of grifting operations that are going on all over the place right now are the nastiest, because they tell the public, some of them don't even really pretend anymore in this, but they at least sort of have this theme that they're helping the homeless in some way. And what they're really doing is enabling drug addiction, so that the drug addicts can buy as many drugs as they can until they die. And they don't provide any assistance with drug addicts or anything to get them off drugs. It's all about enabling them to be a drug addict and abuse themselves as long as possible. And the left, with no exception, supports this at pretty much every level of the grift. And the Democrats, with no exception, support it. And plenty of Republicans, by the way, get bought into this too. So that, I think, has been one of the bigger grifts. During COVID, there were a lot of grifts during COVID. Things like the hospital, I remember in Olympia, getting tents and cots set up outside, and they didn't need it at all. And the health department in Thurston County refused to tell the commissioners that only a few people had died, and that the fatality rate was so low that there was no way the hospitals were going to be overrun. And so they concealed this information for as long as possible. I remember I did an article on it at the time. This is early COVID, so it was 2020. Started exposing some of these things, and I actually knew, had a pretty good sense of having people in the hospital, so I knew that they were just lying. And they didn't explicitly come out and lie. What they did is they were concealing their knowledge from the commissioners and still pushing for hundreds of thousands of dollars and completely waste grant money. Some of those the commissioners caught and stopped at the time, but man, it was a lot of work to get to that point, and it was ridiculous. Let's see. What's the plan to remove the Long-Term Health Care Act? Well, there is an initiative to do that right now. So that's happening. Let's see. Jason, you have a question here, not a political question, but what's your favorite place to walk and bike in Southwest Washington? I don't do a lot of walking and biking in Southwest Washington. I grew up in King County originally, so I've got a lot of favorite places up there. I actually liked Cougar Mountain Park up there a lot. I used to run there a lot. It was fairly close to our farm, and so when I did a lot of running, I would run up there and run in the Cougar Mountain Park system, and that's an amazing system. I used to sometimes go up on Squawk Mountain. They didn't allow mountain bikes, but I remember taking my mountain bike anyway and riding up there a lot. The trail in Auburn, the flat trail that kind of goes down through Kent and Auburn. When I was doing bike riding and triathlon training, I used to go down there a lot, and I kind of liked that trail. Always enjoyed it. I used to go up to Green Lake to train sometimes. That's going to sound funny to people, but I was a serious runner. You wouldn't know it to look at me now, but I was a serious runner for many years. And so I always enjoyed running around Green Lake. It was kind of a fun place to run. It wasn't as nice as when I lived in Whatcom County. The Chuckanut Trail was one of the neatest trails to run on that I ran on a lot up there. And there's a couple of loops, like you can go up to the lake up above and run around that. And I enjoyed that quite a bit. When I was a whitewater kayaker, my favorite river actually was the Middle Fork of the Snoqualmie. I did like the Skykomish, and I liked the Wenatchee. And I remember going through a terrible swim one time in the Green River Gorge, and it was icy and there was snow out. It was pretty cold. But anyway, I don't know. I love the outdoors that we have in Washington. It's people who don't go out and experience that are wasting their time living here by not taking advantage of the fact that we have so many of these opportunities around here. Let's see. Jason, you got a question here, and actually I'm going to look at my time. What am I looking at? Okay, guys, I'm going to take the last couple questions and then we're going to close out for the day. What are your predictions for 2024? Any more summer of loves to prepare for? Well, I would say that if you get a Republican who gets elected to office, you're going to have violence in the streets. That's just what the Democrats do. They can't help themselves. It won't be the Democrats specifically, right? It's going to be the Antifa kind of left-leaning wave of that party, but they like violence in the streets. They support it. Peaceful violence, of course, peaceful murder, peaceful arson. So they'll have peaceful murder and peaceful arson and peaceful violence all the time. And that's what they'll be doing. And anyway, we'll see, we'll see what they do, but that would be my prediction there. Just quickly in closing. So this is my last live stream until I think July. I think July 18th, I'll have my next one. So it's a couple weeks between now and the next one. So just because you don't see a live stream for the next couple days or the next couple weeks, don't think have gone and I'm not doing it anymore. It's just scheduling wise. I'm not going to be able to do the live stream over the next couple weeks. So I'm eager to do more when I get back. People seem to like this as a format. So I hope that I hope that you get some benefit from it. I do want to just close about the training program. If you're interested in one of these training opportunities, try to organize a group of people where you live who would share your interests. And I'm happy to come out and do that type of training for where you live. You can advertise it and bring in people maybe who are new, but expand your network of people who care about transparency and honesty in government. And I think that if you do, you're going to find people that share your passion. They might be different than you. Please expect that. That happens all the time. But the more people like that you get to help you and get engaged in that, the more likely you are to be effective. So I think that if I can help people become more effective where they live and become more effective activists, it's really going to be changing the way your community operates. I've watched single people make massive differences in their community because they engaged. I've watched it. I've seen it happen so many times. I'd like you to be more effective, to find stuff that's worth engaging on, to not sit back and throw your hands up in the air and think that it all is lost and there's no hope and you can't make a difference. You absolutely can make a difference. So if I can help people become more effective in that way, then I will. And I think these training programs, based on what I've seen, tend to produce the best results. So in-person training, I don't care if you live in Sequim or if you live in Colville or if you're in Asotin County or Grays Harbor, anywhere you live, King County, Seattle, anywhere, I will come out and help you. But I just ask you get enough people together. It's not as effective if there's just like 2 people there. You really want enough people organized that different ideas are going to come out, different plans and different thoughts. So I don't want to waste my time, don't waste yours. Organize larger groups. Sometimes in Yakima, they're organizing I'm doing a public speaking event, I think for the Yakima Women's Republican Club, I think. And then I'm doing the training for lunch. And then I'm doing the training that night, for example. So that type of thing is just fine too. So think about that, and we can come up with a couple different plans. Reach out to me, Glen at wethegovern.com. That's Glen with 1 N. Reach out to me on that. And I'm happy to organize with you, and I'm sure we can find a way to make things work. And I think that you'll benefit from it, and your community will if we can do more of that. So with that, I think I'm going to close. We'll see you here in a couple weeks. You'll see some of my other videos. I filmed a couple today that you'll see over the next couple days. And I tried a new thing where I recorded a variety of shorts. You'll have to tell me if you like them or not. And, and watch on the PDC enforcement pages. For some reason, they're really slow catching up on them. So you'll see a bunch of the complaints I filed recently. We'll start posting probably over the next 10 days or so. And I'm anticipating that some of the current investigations are going to, they're going to have the final results on those fines or sanctions or whatever they're going to do. Plus, I'm still waiting for those 11 cases that are before the Legislative Ethics Board for those people that violated the law back then. Those should be resolved with some kind of resolution in the next couple weeks. I'm a little surprised they're waiting this long, but they're all Democrats. So usually when Democrats get in trouble, they like to delay the results longer. So with that, I hope you enjoy the weather and your family and this time that we have, and we will see you next time.